more hungry to read the Bhagavad Gita as it is. And lastly, A God Who Dances, which we've had so much fun in Sunday school reading this book. It's our pleasure, Prabhuji, for you to take time out of your schedule to come here to Columbus and give us your association. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that introduction from the marketing department. It's good to see you all. Rukmini, Krish, everyone, welcome. Thank you for coming. Ramesh, may I ask Prabhu, can I share my screen at some point? Okay.
Yes, Prabhu, I'll make you the co-host, Prabhu. Hold on.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swamini Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvishesha Sunnivadi Paschatya Shatarane Vanchakapa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So nice to see you all. Thank you for coming. This is 2 days before the Gita Jayanti celebration when Lord Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita. So I'd like to take the time this morning to discuss some thoughts about the Gita and read to you some samples from Srila Prabhupada's meditation on Bhagavad Gita called the Gitar Gan. We'll get to that in a few minutes, but first, briefly, especially as somebody who was raised a Christian, the Gita has so much impact in my life because of for one thing, the direct and very condensed approach it gives to spiritual knowledge. I had studied Bible for years, read it in school and in church, and really had no conception whatsoever about the soul, about the nature of God. This week I got from the Gita. And since reading the Gita, I also have come to understand that the Gita is a book that's sacred to 1 billion people around the world. And yet remarkably, relatively few really understand what the Gita is saying. It's incredible, isn't it? Every Hindu will gladly say, yes, I believe in Bhagavad Gita. I accept Bhagavad Gita. But when we discuss the content of the Gita, it is a mystery. It's a vague, sentimental notion at best. So Srila Prabhupada explains in the introduction to the Bhagavad Gita as it is that the Gita has 5 subjects. Again, we'll get to that in just a moment. I'd just like to say a little more, actually, put the Gita in context. The Bible and the Quran and the Bhagavad Gita are the 3 most widely read scriptures in the world. And the Gita is only 2% roughly the length of the Bible and 5% the length of the Quran. In other words, it's just a very cogent scripture, and which makes it so much easier to handle, to understand. But it has to be heard in disciplic succession. It has to be heard by a practitioner or from a practitioner. This is the difference between Prabhupada's Gita and the 700 or so that preceded it. The Bhagavad Gita had been available in English from the time of Thomas Jefferson in the West in the 1700s. But no one had become a devotee of Krishna, even though this is the purport of the Gita. Manmana bhava mad bhakto madhyajimam namaskuru. Just think of me, worship me, become my devotee. It's so explicit, isn't it? Krishna is so very, very clear in what the Gita is for, what the purpose of it is. So how this message has become lost is largely due to people wanting to interpret the Gita for their own purposes, to take Krishna's words and adjust them to support their particular political or philosophical perspective. When Srila Prabhupada was publishing his first Bhagavad Gita as it is, he had a disciple, Hayagriva Prabhu, who was doing editing for him. Hayagriva was an English professor at Ohio State University. So he was editing Prabhupada's writing because Prabhupada's first language, of course, was Bengali and then second English. So he wanted to make sure it was corrected and presented nicely. So at this time, Srila Prabhupada, while working on the manuscript, was rather ill. And he met with Hayagriva. Hayagriva came to see him in San Francisco and said, Swamiji, here are the edits. I want you to please look at them. And Prabhupada more or less said, I'll look at the purports, but these translations, you just put whatever you like. And he said, I'm taking them from other editions. And Prabhupada said, that is all right. Hayagriva said, but this is plagiarism. And Prabhupada replied, this is Krishna's book. They are the plagiarists. So the Gita is subject to many translations and interpretations. But if we find that interpretation which is consistent with the content, then we have one that can actually transform the reader. And this is the Bhagavad Gita as it is. No other edition has had such a deep impact on so many lives. Now it's something like 100 languages around the world. The Gita is there, and it is sold hundreds and millions of copies. So this is a book that is like a time bomb in people's homes. It can transform the life so quickly because it's heard in disciplic succession. So the Gita has 5 subjects. Anyone remember some of these 5? Rukmini, I'm sure, knows them all like the back of her hand. Oh, great. Time.
Is that about Prakriti and Jiva and
Prakriti.
Karma? Yeah.
Yes. So time, Prakriti, Karma, and one more. Jiva, rather, and one more.
The Lord.
What?
Ishvara.
Ishvara, yes. Ishvara. These are the five subjects of the Gita. So sometime in his earlier life, Srila Prabhupada put the Bhagavad Gita into Bengali poetry. I am unable to ascertain exactly when he did this. It appears he may have done it as a householder, but he published a manuscript in 1973 through BBT for distribution in Bengal. And I understand in Bengal, it is really the most popular edition of Bhagavad Gita, this Gita Jayanti, a poeticized version of the text written in vernacular Bengali to make it accessible to the common person. Midi, are you familiar with this, with the Gita Jayanti?
I have heard of it and read portions of it, but I don't have it.
Okay. Well, in the last year and a half, Shrestha's father and I have undertaken a project to translate it into English for the first time. Bhakti Churu Maharaj took the Bengali texts and combined them with Prabhupada's translations from the Bhagavad Gita as it is, and published that along with an audio recording, which is very nicely and professionally done. This was an offering that he did for Prabhupada's centennial in 1996. But the actual literal translation has not been done until now. So Swarup Krishna Prabhu in Calcutta, Shrestha's dad, has taken all of the texts and translated them word for word. And then I've taken the translation and put them into poetry to try to reflect in English poetry what Prabhupada is saying in Bengali. So just today, I finished the second draft of that manuscript just this morning. And thank you. It has been a joy. And, the nuances of Prabhupada's translations are very interesting for those who are acquainted with the Gita. So as I know most of you are. So I'm going to share with you a verse taken from the Gita, representing each of these 5 topics, taken from the Gita Jayanti, I should say. Again, Jiva, Ishvara, Prakriti, Karma, and time. Now, these 5 subjects are very sequential. You know, they're connected. They're very logical. First of all, before we progress in spiritual life, we have to know who we are, right? So it begins with Jiva. In so many verses from the the Gita on the subject of the jiva, right from the beginning, chapter 2. The whole soliloquy Krishna gives Arjuna, just as soon as Arjuna surrenders to him, it's all about the jiva, how it's immortal, how it can't be killed, how it can't be affected by anything material, how a person changes bodies like a person changes clothes, how the jiva changes bodies. All of these things are right up front. And again, things I never read in the Bible, things that are just sort of obscure or amorphous at best. And then Krishna does not reveal himself as Ishvara until where in the Gita? Does anyone remember?
10th
chapter.
chapter.
It's a little earlier. Remember in chapter 4, where Krishna says, I spoke this knowledge to Vivaswan, the sun god. And then Arjuna asks a very human and very real question. Well, wait a minute, Vivaswan's so much older than you are. How could you have spoken it to him? I love the Gita for this reason, that Arjuna is just honest and speaking with integrity, right? His questions are very real and very intelligent and skeptical. He has no problem questioning his friend Krishna because they're friends. How could you have taught it to Vivaswan? So then Krishna discloses, okay, you and I have been through many lives. We've already discussed that, but you cannot remember them, but I can. Herein is Krishna's first hint about his divinity. Now, we talked about malinterpretations of the Gita. This is one of the primary ones where people, now that Krishna is revealing his divinity, people think that, okay, the purpose of Gita is to become God. Just as Krishna has become God through Gita, so I'll also become God. This is what they're thinking. And I can teach you how to become God too. So that's a very appealing presentation to this innocent seeker. I will teach you how to become God. And as Giriraj Maharaj put it so nicely, if to become God is your ambition, why should God help his own competition? There's no devotion when our purpose is to knock him off the altar, right? So Krishna has to reveal himself as Ishvara because he's Ishvara. There's no one else. Just like when Krishna was a householder in Dwarka, he would meditate, he would wake up in the morning and meditate upon himself. So Srila Prabhupada explains that Krishna had to meditate on himself because the goal of meditation is God. And it doesn't mean that we should meditate on ourselves. It means we should meditate on Krishna. So this is Ishvara. And Sumitra, as you said, in chapter 10, there's great detail about how Krishna is Ishvara. Chapter 7, also chapter 9, and many places through the Gita. Now, what I found in reading Prabhupada's Gita Argan is that right from the beginning, Prabhupada refers to Krishna in several places as God. And this is because the audience can understand what he's talking about. Putting it in English, I'm following the text a little bit more cautiously as far as the original. So it's not introducing Krishna's divinity until that chapter 4. Anyway, we'll read one of the many, many verses about Ishvara. So then, having established God, the soul and God, then we have to deal with Prakriti. What is this world, this phenomenal world, which is within our perception? Srila Prabhupada says that people ask, why can't I see God? And he responds, you can't even see the air that you're breathing. Your eyes are so inadequate, you can't even see the air you're breathing. How can you expect to see God with these inadequate eyes? So Prakriti is understanding that the material world is certainly crucial to understanding reality in its fullness. We can see this world around us, this phenomenal world. We can see the planets and the trees and the ground and the water. All of these things are within our power to perceive. So how do we connect them to God? It's a natural thing. Having understood there is a God and who is God, then what is the meaning of this world? In chapter 13, Arjuna asks these questions right at the beginning. You remember how the Gita is divided into 3 sections. The first 6 chapters deal with what? Anyone remember?
Karma.
Karma. And the middle 6?
Bhakti.
Bhakti.
Bhakti. And then the final 6?
Jnana.
Yeah, right. Right. So there's many reasons for this. One is it's explained that karma and jnana are the wings of bhakti. They protect bhakti. They are ancillary to bhakti. Someone compares it to a sandwich. The actual content of the sandwich is in the middle. There's bread above and below, but the content is what defines the sandwich is really in the center. So at the outset of the Gyan section in chapter 13, Arjuna asks many questions about soul, about the field, the knower of the field, the material body. Also in chapter 8, we find he asks about the phenomenal world. So Prakriti is certainly a subject that one has to understand in order to have a full appreciation for divinity. As the Ishopanishad says, Vidyam cha vidyam chayas tad vedo bayam saha, that only to someone who knows both transcendental knowledge and nescience side by side are all the truths of the Vedas understood. So we need to know Prakriti for that reason, to get perspective on it, because it surrounds us, we're enmeshed in it, it's part of our existence. So we need to understand Prakriti. There are, again, many sections in the Gita that talk about this. I've selected a verse, a famous verse I'm sure you'll know. Then finally, next we get to karma. Now, so having understood the soul, God, and the material world, then we need to go back and say, what is the connection between the jiva, or the soul, and the material world? And this is the subject of karma, how the soul, which is spiritual, gets enwrapped in the material world and the material energy. So karma is discussed again in many places in the Gita. I've taken a verse from chapter 13 for that topic. And finally, we could ask, how is the connection between God and Prakriti? And how do we see God in this world if we cannot see him with our material eyes? And so that has to do with time. Time is Krishna's presence in the material world. Time is a form of Krishna that everybody sees. As Srila Prabhupada once said, that we may not voluntarily bow down to Krishna, but we will bow down to him in his form of time. Everybody will bow down to Krishna in his form of time. Time is absent in the spiritual world, but in this Prakriti, it is the dominating factor, the ultimate. What does Krishna say about time in chapter 10? Do you remember?
Time I am, or
That's in 11.
That's in 11, yeah. Number 10 is where he's the opulence of the absolute, where he's saying, among this I am that, among this I am that. So among what I am time. You remember?
Subduers?
Subduers, yes. Among subduers, I am time. So this is Krishna's presence in the lives of everyone, whether they believe in him or not, whether they believe in God or not. Therefore, time is an important constituent of the Gita's content. All right, so any discussion about the 5 topics of the Gita before we go on with our reading? All right.
Are they related to the 5 topics of an Upapurana? I mean, a Purana that's not a Mahapurana?
I don't know.
I mean, those are different topics, but I thought it was interesting that there's also 5.
Yeah, I've been studying the nutshell verses from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 2nd canto, and there's definitely some overlap in those 5 topics and those 4 verses. Of course, the Gita is the undergraduate study. Bhagavatam is postgraduate study of the Gita. But nonetheless, the topics are there. The nutshell verses, if I may say just briefly, they talk about first Ishvara. Krishna says, before there was anything, there was me. After everything is gone, there'll be me. So he defines himself as Ishvara, as he's speaking to Lord Brahma there. And then he goes on to say, if you see anything that's not related to me, know that to be illusion. That is Vritam Tad Pratiyata. That's the material things that have no connection to me are part of my material energy. So that's dealing with Prakriti in a way. Then he talks about how this material world exists, and yet I'm independent of it. I have my individuality, although I'm everywhere and in everything. Still, I am a person in and of myself. This is also mentioned in the Gita. But this again deals with Prakriti, with Ishvara. And finally, he says, now, if anyone wants to understand the truth, you have to search out these three preceding truths, knowing me, knowing this world. So this deals with the jiva, you could say. What is the means for the jiva to get out of the Prakriti? So yeah, there's some connection with Bhagavatam there, but the Upapranas, I don't know. You're more of a scholar than I. What would you?
No, it was a sincere question. It just occurred to me, so I don't know.
Okay. When you find out, let me know. Okay. Anyone else have any comments or reflections?
Prabhu, Ramesh, yes, Prabhu. I had a quick question. Like, I think somewhere it mentions that one of this is not eternal or something. All
Yes.
of eternal. Just.
Yes. Only karma. All of them are eternal except karma. That's
Okay.
my recollection. Does that sound right?
Yes. I don't know. Rukmini Mataji, I don't know.
Yeah, the karma exists only when the jiva is associated with Prakriti.
Okay.
Otherwise, it has no existence. The Prakriti is always there, jiva is always there, Ishvara is always there, and time is always there.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay, good. Sumitra, Mataji, you had a question?
Yes, Prabhu. I was very intrigued to hear about the verse from the Ishopanishad that you cited, that one needs to know both. And I liked your statement, which you said that we need to know Prakriti to put it in perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, we hear about shying away from the world, but here you're saying that we need to use the world and whatever we observe to put it in perspective. So I just found that very different and very refreshing. Yeah, thank you.
It's a good point. If we are able to see these things in relation to Krishna, it can be easy to get enamored by the events in this world and give them undue importance, we could say, right? We could get wrapped up in politics or relationships or sports teams or whatever that can actually elicit an emotional response from us. If that happens, then we know we're not seeing it in perspective, because all of these things are ephemeral. But they are all in relation to Krishna. They're all in relation to Krishna. So the devotee in that way can turn material things into spiritual things by engaging, by recognizing, by identifying things in relation to Krishna in this world. The Gita is helpful for this. For example, seeing the modes of nature. There's so much about the modes of nature in the Gita in so many chapters. 14 is all dedicated to it, and so many other places. So if we see some phenomenon in this world and recognize this is the influence of the mode of passion, or this is the mode of ignorance, that helps us keep perspective, as you say, and realize that the modes alone are active. Do you remember this verse from chapter 5 where Krishna is talking about how the yogi is eating and seeing and working and moving about, and yet within the yogi knows, I'm not doing anything. Only the modes are active. So this is, this is the meaning like that. Like being a devotee doesn't mean we're ignorant of our health, for example. But we also understand that if we take great care of our health and fail to chant Hare Krishna, then it is a wasted life. Even if we drink plenty of flax, or take plenty of flax and do yoga and all those good things for the body, what is the point? You see this with older people especially, who have never understood transcendental knowledge and therefore have great knowledge of their body, but the purpose of it is lost. So good. Okay, any other reflections before we go on? Thank you. All right, so if I may do some screen sharing here, I will.
So Prabhu, I think Rupini Mataji had a comment, like you probably saw that, right?
Oh, no, I did not see.
Okay, it says Bhagavad Gita 7.2 also mentions phenomenal knowledge.
Yes, right from the beginning of the 7th chapter, yes. Now I shall explain to you that knowledge, both numinous and phenomenal. Is that the antonyms? And Rukmini also points out that, yes, if you're in Delhi, you can see the air that you're breathing. It's not good news. That does not mean spiritual vision, no. Okay, thank you. So, all right, so you'll be pleased to know that you're the first people in the world to see the Gita Jayanti translated to English here.
Haribol, Haribol.
I hope you'll be pleased. It's just still in the manuscript stage, but it's pertinent, and I hope you'll find it helpful. Let's see. Okay. So just to get a flavor of Prabhupada's poetry, I'll read the Bengali. And it's embarrassing to read in front of people who actually know Bengali, so please excuse any mispronunciations, Rukmini. Anasakta vishayete yata karma dridha sangsara se kupa hatte nija atma kada atma ke udhara kara atmara uchita atma ke nahi kabu kara abasada atmai atmara bandhu atmai se ripu atmara shatru yehaya hiranya kashipu. So anasakta, without attachment, vishayeta, and the objects of the senses. This is again about the jiva dealing with this world. Yata, when, karma, work, dridha, firm, samsara, material world. Say that, kupa, well. Hatte, from, nija, own, atma, spirit, soul, kada, deliver. Atmake, to the conditioned spirit, soul, udhara, rescue, kara, doing, atmara, of mind, uchitta, proper, atmake, conditioned spirit, soul, nahi, not. Kabu, ever. Kara, do, abhisada, degradation, atma, mind only. Atmara, of conditioned spirit, soul, bandhu, friend, atma, mind only. Say that, ripu, enemy, atmara, of the conditioned soul, shatru, enemy, ye, haya, is, and hiranyakashipu, a demon, like hiranyakashipu. Anyone, before we read the translation, anyone remember what this verse from the 6th chapter? The essence of it? Remember
that the mind is the greatest friend, and yes, with the controlled mind one can liberate oneself, but the uncontrolled mind is the greatest enemy.
The greatest enemy, right? So Prabhupada even takes it a step further. He says, Hiranyakashipu. By working firmly with detachment, one must save the soul from endless wells of worldliness in which it has been pulled. A friendship with the mind makes this much easier to do, for otherwise the mind is like Hiranyakashipu. To the best of my ability, I'm reflecting what Prabhupada says here in English poetry. So here is the dilemma of the jiva. The mind that is controlled is the best friend. And this is related to what we're just discussing, Sumitra Mataji, about how we perceive the world. If our mind is our friend, we perceive the world with a grain of salt. We recognize that it's not our ultimate happiness. But if the mind is our enemy, the mind is saying, somewhere out there is your happiness, and you got to go find it. And thus the mind drags us, and Prabhupada uses the word kupa, the well of material existence. So any thoughts on this? Any discussion?
Thank you so much. So I think in that original verse, that Atma, that word has been repeatedly used many times,
Yes.
like 3, 4. So here also we are seeing that same Atma word being used multiple times. Is that kind of? Just wanted your comments on that.
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's one reason I took this verse to represent the jiva, just Atma, Atma, Atma. The soul is the passenger in the chariot of the body, right? The intelligence is the driver, and the mind are the reins. The mind is the reins. So if the intelligent, and then the senses are the horses. So if the driver, the intelligence, loses control of the reins and does not use the reins properly, then the horses, the senses, will drag the passenger wherever they may choose to go. So when one knows how to work the mind, then the senses become one's friend. And by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, this is accomplished just by the chanting of the holy name. Rupa Goswami has written so beautifully that when I chant the holy name, I wish I had millions of tongues. When I hear the holy name, I wish I had millions of ears. And when the holy name dances in the courtyard of my heart, it conquers the activities of the mind. It conquers the activities of the mind, and thus all the senses become inert.
Mm.
The senses which are so troublesome become peaceful when the mind is controlled, when the mind is conquered by the mercy of the holy name. So this way, the Atma, the soul, is relieved. Okay? And the mind is a critical part, is mentioned in this verse. Any other thoughts or comments?
Thank you, Prabhu.
Prabhu, I find it very interesting to call the mind like Hiranyakashipu, because that's a character we revulse, we don't want to be associated with, but perhaps that's the analogy we should have in our mind when we say, because is my mind a friend or enemy? Sometimes it's hard to put it in tangible terms, but if you say, is my mind acting like Hiranyakashipu now, that almost jolts you out of jolts you into a higher level of consciousness.
A good point. Yes, it really is a danger and a threat. I have to laugh. It reminds me of a friend I had he and his wife had a young son. And so I asked, how is your son doing? And he says, during the day, he's like Prahlad, and at night, he's like Hiranyakashipu. So I chose this verse too because it's so colorful and kind of shows you how Srila Prabhupada wraps in his commentary with these translations. Obviously, the word Hiranyakashipu doesn't appear in the Sanskrit Bhagavad Gita, but Prabhupada has added it just for this reason, to accentuate the danger of the mind. Okay, anything else? All right, so here's the verse I've chosen for Ishvara. And once again, there's so many verses on each of these topics in the Gita. This is from 7:7. Atma peksha para tattva shuna dhananjaya parat para ye tattva anye keha naya atma te samasta jagat ache pratishtita sutre yena gnata take mani gana yata. Of every kind of truth, of every truth of any kind, O conqueror of wealth, there is no truth that passes or that lies beyond myself. Because the universe resides in me, it can be said that everything depends on me as pearls are strung on thread. To be able to rhyme use rhyme and meter, as Prabhupada's done, is a discipline for the writer, because your choice of words is limited and you have to be sensitive to the rhythm, the meter. So I really appreciate how Prabhupada did this in the Bengali, every verse of the Gita, and how it was a meditation for him. And again, we're very familiar with this translation from the 7th chapter. Everything depends on me as pearls are strung on a thread. This is Ishwara, and it's personal. The impersonalist will think, okay, this is me in my Brahman sense, that I'm one with God upon whom everything depends. But it's a big leap to take it from this very simple understanding that Krishna is saying. Yes, I am Ishwara. I am the foundation of everything. Everything depends on me. These are very strong statements that only Krishna can make. And because of our enviousness of Krishna, there is a tendency by many commentators to try to interpret it in a way where I can take part in that position. It makes no sense. And yet, rather than say, okay, Krishna is speaking about himself, the ambitious so-called aspiring Ishwara will try to say, okay, how can I get in on the action? It's really quite comical and unfortunate also. But this is, practically speaking, all the other Gitas that have been translated, very few exceptions, except for Prabhupada's disciples and a very few others, give the proper understanding of the Ishwara verses such as this. Krishna is very specifically referring to himself. And he's not at all ashamed of it. He's not at all falsely modest, nor is he being arrogant. He's just stating the facts because Arjuna is asking for the facts. He wants to know what is going on. So no truth exceeds Krishna. Everything that exists depends on Krishna. Any thoughts or comments on this sample Ishwar verse? Yes, Ramesh Prabhu.
So, Prabhu, yeah, the one thing about the example you're given of the pearls on the thread. So I heard in previous discourses like how beautifully Krishna has given that example in the sense like God is the source, he's the source of everything and he's the basis of everything. But actually we don't see him anywhere. And so this example kind of brings up that point so beautifully.
Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pointing that out. That's beautiful. Yes. Really nice. He's the foundation, but he doesn't. Krishna is so interesting, He puts himself forward in the Bhagavad Gita because it's the absolute truth. And still, he remains hidden. Right? And people say that if God exists, the atheists will say like this, why doesn't he show himself and just resolve this dispute about whether or not he exists? If he actually exists, he should just show himself and then everyone will believe. And the fact that he doesn't do so is one of the evidences for atheism. So Prabhupada counters that by saying, what is your qualification to see him? Why should he show himself to you? Do you think that he is your order carrier? Do you think that you're so important that he should drop everything and just show himself? What is your credential? What is your qualification? See, this is the weakness in the atheists' argument. They can't see the president. They can't even see the governor of a state. They probably can't see the mayor of their city without qualification. But they think that God is going to just show themselves because then if he does, they may do him the big favor of believing in him. Maybe. All right, that's beautiful. He's hiding like the string behind a pearl. And yet the pearl, the necklace gets its shape because of God. Very good. All right. Let's move on to Prakriti. this well-known verse also from chapter 7. Bhume jala agni vayu buddhi ye akasha ara harkankara mana buddhira prakara esaba asta prakerera haya ye prakriti bina sei amahate bahira vibhuti. My separated energies of matter are 8 kinds: earth and water, air and fire, ego and the mind, along with ether, emptiness, and all intelligence. These 8 are my inferior external opulence. So in translating these, I've tried to use the words that Prabhupada uses as much as possible to get the idea. In discussing ether, Bhumir apanalo vayu, calm, ether. It is the most subtle of the 5 gross elements. So I asked my physicist friend what ether is, and he explained it's really the space between things. That is, of course, in the atmosphere we live in, that space is filled with air, but in the vacuum of space, that element which keeps things apart is ether. Now, physics is kind of coming upon this with the discussions of dark matter, this element that supposedly exists, that is the majority of matter in the universe, but is beyond perception. So I don't know enough to say if those two things correlate. But
it's more like just the space itself. So I think the dark matter, I think there's some possibility that it has been resolved, that was it. That may have been an error.
I see.
But the space itself. But it seems like emptiness and space have sort of different connotations. So how did you choose emptiness to put here?
Trying to again relate this to the English-speaking person, there's an innate sense of understanding of ether that doesn't seem to exist. It's more or less considered mythological in English, like an arcane belief. So that's why I appreciated my physics friend's crude definition of emptiness, at least space.
Yes, that's because there is a notion of ether that was come up with by physicists, and then it was disproved by physicists in a particular experiment, and so they associate it with that notion. But the notion as space is certainly very much very fundamental to physics. So if it's equated with space, then that I think would still be understood.
So thank you, I appreciate that. So space would be more accurate than emptiness, or at least creating the proper understanding in the English mind.
Yes, because there are vibrations in space. So and space-time itself can ripple. So it's not completely empty, because then there's a vibration in it, right? So
good point. Okay, thank you very much. That's very helpful. So this description of 8 seems very primitive when the table of elements has, what is it, like 150 or so, or more, and new ones are being added now and then, right? So,
yeah, I mean, it's not quite so many, but yeah, it's getting there.
Getting there, yeah. So these categories are actually quite comprehensive. Earth are the solids, water, the liquids, air, the gases, fire, the energies. The gross ones, aside from the ether that we're discussing, are really categories in which all these other elements will fit, whether they're in a liquid state or gaseous state or whatever. But the mind and intelligence and ego, these are the subtle components of matter. Again, just showing the depth of the Gita and its comprehensiveness as well. beyond this Prakriti that's gross, there's another Prakriti that's subtle and that is really beyond the perception of materialistic people as elemental energies or entities in themselves. You know, the mind, for example, is common to all living entities to one extent or another, along with intelligence. But these are separate ingredients of the Prakriti. They're combined in our experience, but they're also separated. The word in the Gita is bhina, or separated energies. And then they are combined together to form the living bodies for the conditioned souls. There are sciences dedicated to all these lesser elements. And when we come on the last one, false ego, that's the domain of Krishna consciousness, the science of false ego, where the soul identifies with matter. And that also is an element, false ego. And these things are described in detail in the Bhagavatam that those more learned than I can explain more clearly. But each of these elements manifests as the universe is being created. And each of these ingredients comes from a greater pool of them to be combined in forming the living bodies for the jivas. So much about Prakriti is there. It seems simplistic, but in fact, it's so much deeper and more thorough than what can be known from the Aristotelian method of whatever I can perceive with my senses. Any other comments or thoughts on this?
So, Prabhu, one question. So we have these three energies of the Lord, like the Tatastha Sakti and Antaranga Sakti and Bahiranga, like the tree. So is this also related with that? So here is Lord Krishna explaining the external energy, and then
right.
the jiva will be the Tatastha one, and that's where, okay.
Yeah, these are subsections of that external energy.
Okay,
This is how it's divided.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, good point. Reminds me of a story about Hridayananda Maharaj when he first became a devotee. He was a student at the University of California in Berkeley. And he wanted to just drop out of college and join the ashram, but Prabhupada told him to stay in school. So he went to school dutifully as a brahmachari with his shaven head, and his tilak, and his sika, and his saffron dhoti. And on his desk in the classroom, he set up his altar. So the physics teacher was giving a lecture in which he said, there are, I've forgotten the number. There's so many kinds of energy, kinetic energy and this and that. And Hridayananda Maharaj said, no, there's three kinds of energy. The internal, external, and marginal. You can imagine a zealous 22-year-old Hridayananda Maharaj, arguing with his physics teacher. So he didn't complete his degree there at Berkeley, as it turned out. He went back and completed it later. But anyway, it's again shows the depth and yet the simplicity of the Gita, that all these things can be explained in a summary way. And then the Bhagavatam, as the graduate study, gives tremendous detail about how they manifest. Each one, the gross elements are related to a sense object, right? Sound, touch, taste, they're all connected with these respective energies as the universe unfolds, the material universe is created. So, all right, any other comments there? Next verse is from, it's chapter 13, verse 22, about karma. Prakrita haye jiva bunje se guna, prakritira guna sabha prakritira dana, prakrita gunera sangha ucha nicha yoni, sadasad janma hoya anya nahi gani. The soul therefore aligns with the gross matter he patrols, while trying to enjoy under the spell of nature's modes. He takes his birth repeatedly in high and lower forms, while meeting good and evil as his outer shell transforms. So this is karma, how the living entity interacts with Prakriti, how the jiva interacts with Prakriti. And it's just a sad story, perpetual story. As one of my godbrothers put it, you can't win, you can't break even, and you can't quit. Sada sad joni janmasu, up and down, happiness and distress, birth after birth. This is karma. And this is the temporary content of the Gita. It doesn't have to continue. We do have control about whether we continue our karma. Any other comments about this? Okay. And finally, in the last verse, we'll choose this verse that Sumitra, you mentioned earlier about time. This takes place in chapter 11, where Arjuna is undergoing a lot of emotional transformation. Remember, in chapter 11, he's finally, in chapter 10, he has finally and fully come to accept Krishna as God. What is the verse? When Param Brahma, Param Dhamma, Pavitram Paramam Dhamma. Purusham Shashvatam Divyam Adi Devam Ajam Vibhum. Yes, you are the eternal, supreme, complete. And all these great sages in the past have said it about you, and now you're saying it about yourself. Arjuna is ecstatic. And then he asks Krishna, how do I meditate on you? And Krishna gives him a whole long list of ways. And now in chapter 11, he says, that's great, that's wonderful. If you think I'm worthy, could I see your divine form? How you pervade the whole creation? Because you've already said you're in everything. Could I see that? Could I witness how you're doing this? So it's Arjuna's request. And you can see that shows a couple of emotions. It shows curiosity. It shows a great deal of confidence. Although he's just understood that Krishna is God, he still feels comfortable enough to ask him for a favor. You know, that shows his friendship with the Lord. So Krishna immediately says, yes, of course. And he gives him the capacity to see, and then he shows him. And then first Arjuna is saying, wow, that's so beautiful. It's awesome. And then he says, whoa, that's really scary. I see everybody is dying and you're killing everybody. What's going on? Who are you? So he sees this aspect of Krishna, which in the Bhagavatam, Krishna compares to Krishna's backside. Prabhupada compares to Krishna's backside. That's also part of Krishna, but it's the unpleasant part that you don't want to see. The part where he's present as time, where everybody is under his grip and his execution. Now, in this verse, the Gita uses a few different meters, a couple of different meters, and Srila Prabhupada also uses these different Bengali meters, such as in this verse. Mahakala amisai pravridha ichjaya hai yata loka grasa karibare. Pravridha yechi ami se antaryami loka kshaya antare. Ata eva yara heta yudha lagi samaveta tumi bina sakale maribe. Yata yoda asiyache samuke dhana daiche kehanahi jivita se rabi. I think this is the same meter as we use for the Guru Puja Kirtan, yeah? Guru Puja, the Shri Guru Charana Padma. Mahakala ame sai pravridha ischaya hai yata loka grasa karibare. So this is a classical Bengali meter. So in English, it might sound like this. Like Krishna says, time I am, the vast assault, the great devouring death of all. By my will, every planet is destroyed. As super soul who dwells within, I bring all creatures to an end. I am the force nobody can avoid. Thus, every warrior gathered here is guaranteed to disappear, no matter where or how they are deployed. So this is Arjuna's, the response to Arjuna's question, that I'm time and I'm here to kill everybody. Nobody's going to escape. In the subsequent verse, he names the great warriors who Arjuna is about to see kill. So the destroyer of the worlds, we know this is the famous verse from the first nuclear blast. Robert Oppenheimer spoke it, quoted it. Kalos me, I am time. So that presence is eternal, but it exists only in the material world. So that is how one of the places where Krishna talks about time. There's not a lot, but he mentions this and elsewhere how he's present as to the end of everything. All right, so there's some meditations on the Gita from Gita Jayanti.
I really like that word deployed that you used here, Prabhu. That was quite apt.
That's called poetic license, Rukmini, where you pull something out that's not exactly in the verse, but it rhymes.
Yeah, well, it was quite apropos.
I'm glad you think so. Okay, we have a question from, I guess that's, yes, from Sumitra.
Yes, Prabhu. First, this was wonderful. I'm curious to see when the book is going to come out. And my second question was, in the book, does it flow through like the Gita as it is, or does it say which verse belongs to which of the 5 topics?
It just flows through.
Okay.
Yeah, it flows through. The Gita can be analyzed like that by topic. It can also be analyzed by Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. Some verses are about the existential position of the soul, Sambandha. Some are about the functional interaction between the soul and the Lord, Abhideya. And then some are about ecstatic love, Prayojana. So that's a nice exercise. Both of those are nice exercises to use in studying the Gita. But my purpose here was just to really highlight Prabhupada's poetry as much as possible. And the nuances, for those who are familiar with the Gita as it is, there'll be a lot of nuances in this text, at least I've enjoyed reading. And when it will be published, I don't know. We're submitting it to BBT. I'm not sure if they'll do it. It might be a little too specialized for their mass marketing goals. And if not, we'll put it on Amazon. It can be available that way.
Okay. It's also interesting that even after this verse, Arjun spends 7 more chapters asking questions. If Krishna was a judgmental god, he probably would have said, I just told you all this. What do you have more to ask? He still ignores all the other questions. So,
right. And questions are a sign of intelligence, isn't it? Like Arjuna is studying the thing from every possible angle of vision and exhaustively, thoroughly. Again, considering the context of the battlefield, it's amazing. He takes the time. It's like, okay, I got the basic idea here. Let's go. But he does, because that way there can be no room for maneuvering. Well, Krishna hasn't explained something. Just everything you can think of is there in the Gita. I mean, have you ever read the Gita and thought, I wish Krishna would be more explicit about this?
Sorry, please.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, or how the same message is said so many times. Perhaps that's how much repetition it takes for us to really get it.
Yes.
Or it's almost like Krishna is preempting, well, someone might argue it this way, and let me answer that doubt even now.
Yes. Yes.
And yet at the same time, it's fresh every time you read it.
Absolutely, yes.
Quality of divinity, yes. Ever fresh. All right, well, I hope you all have a wonderful Gita Jayanti. Will you celebrate by maybe reading the translations? Is that on your agenda?
Generally, every year we do, we read the whole Gita on that Gita Jayanti day. So this time also we'll announce. The only thing is, the challenge is like the temple is closed as such, but we can try to do it on Zoom. So
I have the day off that day. I took the day off for that purpose.
Very good. Do you read the English or Sanskrit or both?
Usually we do both. I don't know what will happen this time.
That's about a 5-hour yagya, isn't it?
Yep.
5-6
Yeah.
hours. Yeah. All right. Well,
So Prabhu, if I might make a request, if I could get the Bengali with the diacritical marks, first of all, because I don't have it, and second, I'm tempted to adjust some things.
I would be grateful. Absolutely. I'll send you the manuscript to look over. Your comments would be welcome.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So nice to see you all. I hope the
Thank you,
plague
Prabhu.
passes in Columbus soon, and I'd love to visit you in the spring.
Look forward to your visit. Thank you. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you.
Thank
Hare
you.
Krishna.
Have a pleasure. Hare Krishna.
Yes. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you, devotees. So I see a few people on the call. So I have only a small local announcement. Again, this is the Gita Jayanti related. So we'll I'll talk to Prem Sindhu Prabhu and we'll send out an email like about our the Gita reading. So either is it going to be on Tuesday or is it going to be on the weekend? So we'll let me talk to Prem Sindhu Prabhu and send out that communication. So that's the Ekadasi. So coming Tuesday is the Mokshada Ekadasi. So other than that, I don't see anybody from the book distribution team on the call. But I know there have been some updates on a lot of Bhagavad Gitas being distributed. So thank you to everybody who is helping with the book distribution. And if you anytime you need any books or anything, please contact the book distribution team, Prem Sindhu Prabhu or Hari or myself. So we'll be able to help. Anything else, anybody? Any announcements or anything? And once again, thank you, Sumitra Mataji. Thank you for getting Prabhu. It was a real pleasure listening to him. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha paritanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namo.